Different cultures have given the wild gods different names throughout Azeroth's history. The Night Elves know them as the Ancient Guardians, the Pandaren revere them as the August Celestials, and the Trolls worship them as the Loa. Though their names and traditions differ from culture to culture, they all refer to the same kind of powerful nature spirits whose souls are destined for Ardenweald upon their death, before eventually returning to the Emerald Dream. Today, I'll be focusing on the wild gods as they were known to the Night Elves, the Ancient Guardians. The wild gods have been around for thousands of years, long before the Kaldari built their empire, and before the first great troll kingdoms rose across Azeroth. The Titan Keeper Freya wandered the world nurturing regions where the energies of the Well of Eternity had gathered. In places such as Ungoro Crater, Sholazar Basin, and the Vale of Eternal Blossoms, life flourished under her care. From these thriving sanctuaries emerged some of Azeroth's greatest creatures, colossal beings that would become known as the Wild Gods. The War of the Ancients was a vicious conflict that required the combined efforts of many wild gods, the Night Elves, and the Dragonflights. Together, they stood against the Burning Legion, and Agamagan was one of the wild gods that Cenarius called upon to join the battle. A formidable warrior, Agamagan cut down countless demons beneath his massive hooves, breathed corrosive acid upon his enemies, and launched great volleys of thorns from his back into the Legion's ranks. The battle carried on for some time, stretching west across the continent, where Agamagan even clashed with the Pit Lord Manaroth, one of Archimonde's lieutenants. Though he proved both resilient and relentless, even the Great Boar could not withstand the Legion's endless numbers. In the end, he fell, sacrificing himself to buy Malfurion Stormrage and the others precious time to reach the Well of Eternity. Thousands of years after his death, Charlgo Razorflank, leader of the Death's Head and Razorfen tribes, sought to resurrect the fallen wild god. However, the dark ritual she performed to restore the Great Boar stood in direct opposition to his noble and protective nature. In response, the wild god's spirit manifested within Razorfen Crawl, causing the very land around him to come alive. When adventurers arrived, he called upon them to defeat Charlga, hoping that by stopping her he could guide his descendants back toward the noble path they had long since abandoned. Legend says that where Agamagan fell during the War of the Ancients, his blood soaked into the earth and gave rise to immense masses of thorn-covered vines. In time, his Quillboar descendants settled among the largest of these thorn clusters, known as the Razorfen, believing it to be the resting place of the Great Boar. According to the Quillboar, Agamagan's body itself forms the entirety of the Razorfen, making it the holiest of all the thorn clusters. Razorfen Downs is considered especially sacred, as its entrance is believed to be formed from the demigod's massive maw. The Quillboar believed that any who are not loyal to the Great Boar will be swallowed whole before their remains are spat back out. Sometime later, while questing through the Barrens, adventurers can meet a captured Quillboar named Mangletooth, who offers perhaps the best insight into how deeply Agamagan is revered among his descendants. Agamagan has left his body behind to protect us, and he gives his spirit so we may protect him. Although he fell thousands of years ago, his legacy lives on through the Quillboar. Their shamans invoke the Great Boar's strength in battle and ritual alike. Blood shards believed to have been formed from his spilled blood are treasured among the tribes, and boars themselves are revered, with the strongest among them seen as a sign of Agamagan's favor. There's an ancient tale you may not know called The White Stag and the Moon. It's one of the oldest Tauren myths passed down from generation to generation by proud hunters. While other races tell their own versions of the story, this is how the Tauren remember it. Into the brave hearts of her pure children, the Earth Mother placed the love of the hunt. For the creatures of the first dawn were savage and fierce. They hid from the Earth Mother, finding solace in the shadows and the wild places of the land. The Shuhalo hunted these beasts wherever they could be found and tamed them with the Earth Mother's blessing. One great spirit eluded them, however. Aparo was a proud stag of snow-white fur. His antlers scraped the roof of the heavens and his mighty hooves stamped out the deep places of the world. The Shuhalo hunted Aparo to the corners of the dawning world and closed in to snare the proud stag. Seeking to escape, the great stag leapt into the sky. Yet as his escape seemed assured, his mighty antlers tangled in the stars which held him fast. Though he kicked and struggled, Aparo could not loose himself from the heavens. It was then that Musha found him as she chased her brother Anshe towards the dawn. Musha saw the mighty stag as he struggled and fell in love with him immediately. The clever Moon made a bargain with the great stag. She would set him free from the snare of the stars if he would love her and end her loneliness. Musha loved Aparo and conceived a child by him. The child, a demigod some would claim, was born into the shadowed forests of the night. He would be called Cenarius, and walk the starry path between the waking world and the kingdom of the heavens. There is another tale of the great white stag and the moon. It says that Meloran first fell in love with a loon during the very first full moon. When her gentle light shone down upon him, driving away fear and filling him with hope, he was determined to reach the moon goddess. Meloran chased her across the heavens night after night. Though no one could ever truly possess the moon's light, his devotion never wavered. In time, he grew swift enough to reach her, and Elune was so moved by the great stag's determination and beauty that she accepted him as her consort. Ever since, it is said that Meloran has loved moonlit forests above all others, for they remind him of the one who captured his heart. Whichever tale one chooses to believe, they all reach the same conclusion. Meloran and Elune fell in love, and from their union came Cenarius. Over the years, some came to believe that Ysera was Cenarius' true mother because she raised him as her foster son within the Emerald Dream. In truth, that was never the case, although Ysera did love Cenarius deeply and cared for him as though he were her own. Likewise, she shared a close friendship with Meloran. Their bond was never anything more than that, though. When the War of the Ancients was going on, Cenarius called upon his father and the other wild gods to aid the Night Elves under the command of Gerard Shadowsong. The battle that followed was brutal beyond measure. Meloran fought with all his might beside his fellow wild gods, but even their immense strength could not guarantee victory. One by one, Ursoc, Aviana, Ursula, and Agamagan fell before the Legion's relentless assault. With every wild god that fell, Meloran fought all the harder. He crashed through the Legion's ranks with unstoppable force, his mighty antlers goring demons while his hooves crushed countless more beneath them. Amid the chaos, the Legion turned its attention towards Cenarius. Demons swarmed the young demigod, determined to bring him down before he could escape. Before they could strike the killing blow, Meloran charged into the fray. The brilliance of his snow-white coat momentarily blinded the demons as he tore through their ranks, his antlers and hooves carving a path straight to his son. One after another, Legion's soldiers fell before the great stag until Cenarius was once again safe. With nothing more than a glance toward Gerard, Meloran silently told him everything he needed to know. Get Cenarius to safety. As Gerard and the defenders carried the unconscious demigod away, Meloran turned back toward the battlefield. Then, Archimonde appeared. Though the great stag towered over the demon lord, size meant little to one as powerful as Archimonde. Black lightning split the earth around Meloran before waves of fellfire engulfed his brilliant white coat. Refusing to yield, Meloran tore free of the flames and lowered his antlers. With a thunderous charge that shook the very ground beneath him, he hurled himself at the defiler. The impact sent tremors across the battlefield as demons and defenders alike watched in stunned silence while two of Azeroth's mightiest champions clashed. Their battle raged on as each landed devastating blows upon the other. But Meloran's wounds steadily mounted. At last, Archimonde seized the great stag by the head. With a single terrible motion, the demon lord twisted with all his strength. Meloran's neck snapped. The great guardian of Azeroth fell not while retreating, nor while seeking glory for himself, but while buying enough time for his son to escape. Archimonde cast the lifeless body aside as though it were nothing, before turning his attention back to the battle. Realizing Meloran had fallen and that Cenarius was still unconscious, Malfurion called upon nature itself in a rage. Massive vines burst from the earth, binding Archimonde where he stood. Though the spell briefly halted the demon lord's advance, he soon vanished in a burst of hellfire, burning away the vines as he retreated. Only moments later, Alexstrasza, Ysera, and Soradormi, along with their dragonflights, arrived to join the battle. Yet the moment Ysera saw Meloran lying motionless upon the battlefield, she came to a screeching halt. For one of the very few times in recorded history, the dreamer's brilliant jade eyes opened wide. A deafening cry echoed across the battlefield as she surged toward her fallen friend. Tearing through every demon foolish enough to stand in her path, thousands were flung aside by her wings, fangs, and claws before she finally reached him. The battle around her seemed to disappear. Ysera lowered her head beside Meloran's and rested her chin gently upon his. There, on a battlefield still consumed by war, the aspect of the Emerald Dream openly wept for one of her oldest and dearest friends. During Deathwing's assault on Mount Hyjal, the druids succeeded in restoring the great stag to life. Wasting no time, Malorn returned to the defense of Hyjal, helping drive Ragnaros' forces from the sacred mountain. With the immediate threat ended, the Ancient Guardian once again faded into the background, watching over the wilds until Azeroth would need him again. Years after his resurrection, the Burning Legion launched its third invasion of Azeroth. As the druids prepared to defend Azeroth once more, they sought to commune with Malorn. To do so, they first had to recover the Idol of the Wild, an ancient relic entrusted to mortal druids long ago, but stolen by the Satyrs during the Legion's invasion. Once the idol had been reclaimed, the Archdruid and the Defenders of the Dream gathered the ancient essences of the wild before traveling to Nordrassil to perform a ritual unlike any in thousands of years. The ritual was successful, but something was wrong. Malorn could sense a great darkness within the Emerald Dream, one so powerful that even his own mind begun to cloud. Determined to discover its source, he ventured into Shalabdrassil, where he had first sensed the corruption. Following it deeper into the dream, he eventually reached the Rift of Alm. There, he witnessed the nightmare's true power. Left unchecked, it would continue to spread like a disease until it consumed all of Azeroth. Before he could return and warn the others, the nightmare ensnared him, trapping him in one of his darkest memories. Malorn was forced to relive the War of the Ancients. Once again, he stood against Archimonde, and once again, he was forced to endure his own death at the Demon Lord's hands. Realizing something had gone terribly wrong, Remulos knew he had to save his grandfather. Opening the long-sealed portal into the Rift of Aln, he led the Archdruid and the Druids of the Dream Grove into the nightmare itself. Within the nightmare, they found the battlefield exactly as Malorn remembered it. The dead littered the ground, friend and foe alike, while the surviving wild gods fought desperately against impossible odds. In the midst of the carnage stood Malorn, once again locked in battle with Archimonde. Charging into the fray, the druids fought beside the great stag, driving back the demons before turning their attention to the nightmare's twisted vision of the Defiler. After a fierce battle, the illusion was finally broken, freeing Malorn from the prison of his own memories. When they returned to the Dream Grove, Malorn appeared once more in spirit, thanking the Archdruid and the Defenders of the Dream. He spoke of his confidence that Druidism remained in capable hands before fading from sight once again, trusting that Azeroth's guardians would continue protecting the wilds in his absence. Later, when Farak and the Primalists threatened the newly blossoming Amirdrassil, Malorn answered Azeroth's call once again. Fighting alongside the other wild gods and Azeroth's defenders, he helped ensure that the New World Tree would survive, continuing the duty he had carried since the dawn of the world. Unlike many other wild gods, nearly every culture upon Azeroth has its own version of Goldrin's legend. The Night Elves know him as Goldrin, the Great Wolf, while both the Tauren and the Orcs know him as Logosh. As Rhaegar Earthfury once explained, "We Orcs ride wolves into battle. When our people arrived on Kalimdor, the Tauren told us of Logosh. We adopted him as our hero on this new world. For the will of the Orcs is strong like his, and like him, not even death can stop us." The trolls, goblins, and dwarves all tell their own versions of the legend as well, though the details of those stories aren't known. What remains consistent across every culture is Goldrin's indomitable will and unmatched ferocity. Legend tells that not even death itself could keep the Great Wolf from returning to aid his people, ensuring that his name has endured throughout Azeroth's history. Goldrin's influence extends far beyond ancient legends. Druids who sought to emulate his ferocity learned to assume the pack form, a transformation that granted tremendous power but demanded incredible self-control. The rage of the Great Wolf burned so fiercely within the form that many druids lost themselves to it, turning on friend and foe alike. Even Malfurion's Storm Rage attempted to master the transformation, only to be consumed by Goldrin's fury and attack his own teacher Cenarius. Forced to intervene, Cenarius placed Malfurion into a deep slumber within the great tree Darl Nir until his mind recovered. After experiencing the danger firsthand, Malfurion forbade the use of the pack form altogether. But Goldrin's legacy would ultimately shape one of Azeroth's most well-known curses. Using one of the Great Wolf's fangs together with the Staff of Elune, Belisra Starbreeze and Raylar Fangfire forged the Scythe of Elune. Their goal was to tame the feral spirits of the Druids of the Pack, who had continued practicing the forbidden transformation despite Malfurion's decree. Instead, the ritual had the opposite effect. The immense power of Goldrin and Elune fused together.
creating the first Worgen curse and forever changing Azeroth's history. However, Raylar would be the only one who seemed to be able to control the form when he changed into it, which he would later be known as Alpha Prime. When the first wild creatures stirred upon Azeroth, Goldrin was among them. Though he possessed a noble heart, he was also the embodiment of untamed ferocity. A relentless bloodlust burned within him, one he could never truly silence. Whenever darkness fell across Azeroth and Elun's light illuminated the world beneath the full moon, Goldrin felt as though a lone eye were watching him from the heavens. Whether real or imagined, the feeling stirred something deep within him. His fury would swell, his instincts would sharpen, and the Great Wolf became even more stubborn, savage, and bloodthirsty than before. When the War of the Ancients erupted, Goldrin finally found the battle he had spent his life waiting for. The Legion's armies stretched farther than the eye could see, while many of the other wild gods looked upon the endless ranks of demons with understandable concern. Goldrin saw only more targets for him to annihilate. Their overwhelming numbers meant nothing to him. He would fight until his final breath, and he did exactly that. With fangs bared and claws stained with demonic blood, the Great Wolf carved a path through the Legion's forces. Demon after demon fell before him until at last, even Goldrin was overwhelmed by the countless enemies surrounding him. Though he fell in battle, his legend was only beginning. Though, as stated before, many believed that death itself could not keep the Great Wolf from protecting those he favored. Both the Tauren and the Kaldorei tell stories of Goldrin's spirit returning to aid them in their darkest hours. According to Tauren legend, he made his final stand in what is now the Barrens, slaying hundreds of demons before finally succumbing to his wounds. Yet, even after his body fell, his spirit continued fighting alongside his people. The Night Elves tell a similar tale, believing Goldrin's ghost appeared during the defense of the city of Eldrath, holding back the Legion long enough for retreating elves to reach a vital defensive position. Whether these stories happened exactly as they've been told or have grown with the passing of time, one thing remained true. Goldrin's courage and ferocity became legendary. And after the War of the Ancients, the Great Wolf was not seen for thousands of years. During the events of the book Wolfheart, it's revealed that Goldrin's spirit lived on within Varian Wrynn. The Great Wolf saw something of himself within the human king, an unmatched ferocity tempered by a noble heart. Yet where Goldrin had often been consumed by his fury, Varian could master the beast within, unleashing his savage instincts in battle without surrendering the honor and compassion that defined him. Perhaps that balance was why, of all the champions upon Azeroth, Goldrin chose to walk beside the King of Stormwind. Thousands of years after the War of the Ancients, adventurers would finally come face to face with the legendary Goldrin during the Cataclysm. As Deathwing's return plunged Azeroth into chaos, Goldrin's shrine atop Mount Hyjal came under attack by corrupted Worgens. With the shrine overrun, adventurers fought to drive the creatures back, only for an even greater threat to reveal itself. From the corruption emerged Lycanthoth, the Dark Ancient, a twisted reflection of Goldrin himself. After a fierce battle, the adventurers succeeded in destroying the monstrous creature and cleansing the shrine of its corruption. Moments later, the Great Wolf finally revealed himself. With his sanctuary restored, Goldrin joined the defenders of Mount Hyjal in the battle against the Twilight's Hammer, once again fighting to protect the wilds he had defended since the War of the Ancients. Following Varian Wrynn's death at the Battle of the Broken Shore, Goldrin withdrew from the world to reflect upon the loss of the champion he had chosen. Seeking solitude, he traveled to Stormrage Barrow Dens in Moonglade, where he entered the Emerald Dream to rest. However, while his spirit wandered the dream, his physical body remained vulnerable upon Azeroth, making him an ideal target for the Burning Legion's corruption. Thankfully, Thistlelee Crow and the Archdruid of the Dreamgrove discovered the Legion's plan before it could succeed. Together, they drove back the demons and prevented Goldrin from suffering the same fate as many other wild gods. Though Thistlelee and the Archdruid vowed to hunt down those responsible for the attack, Goldrin had little interest in waiting. Returning to the wilds, he soon joined the Druids of the Claw and the Dreamgrove Menders in the battle against the Legion on the Broken Shore. During the events of the Fourth War, Princess Tess Greymane wished to become a Worgen, believing she could better understand her people and earn their respect if she experienced the curse herself. Her parents, Gen and Mia Greymane, strongly opposed the idea and instead sought the aid of the druid, Basandra Stormclaw, hoping there was another way for Tess to understand the burden her people carried. To teach her that lesson, Basandra called upon Goldrin. Rather than allowing Tess to embrace the curse, the Great Wolf placed her into a powerful vision where she lived as a Worgen during the Forsaken invasion of Gilneas. She experienced the fear, the rage, and the helplessness that her people had endured. Yet despite everything she witnessed, one truth remained unchanged. She still couldn't save her brother Liam. When the vision finally ended, Tess realized she had been searching for the wrong answer. She did not need to become a Worgen to understand or lead her people. It was never the curse that united the Gilneans. It was their resolve to remain Gilnean despite it. Through Goldrin's guidance, Tess learned that true understanding came not from sharing their form, but from sharing their strength. When Amir Drasil began to bloom and champions from across Azeroth gathered to defend it, with his trademark ferocity, he joined the battle against the Druids of the Flame, fighting to prevent the World Tree from being destroyed or corrupted before it could truly flourish. After Amir Drasil was successfully defended and Farak was slain, Goldrin remained to celebrate the World's Tree blooming alongside the many heroes and defenders who fought to protect it. Among the silt at the bottom of the deep waters of Lake Elunara rests a great beast known as Omen, a wild god who is friend to both mortals and immortals alike. Like many of the other wild gods, he answered the call to defend Azeroth during the War of the Ancients, standing alongside his defenders against the Burning Legion. During the conflict, Omen fought beside the Tauren hero, Hueln Highmountain. In one particularly fierce battle, the Legion unleashed a blast of fell energy toward Omen. Hueln tried to shield his ally, but the attack struck the wild god, leaving him gravely wounded. Though he survived the battle, the fell energy continued to spread through his body, slowly corrupting him. Knowing that he would eventually lose himself to its influence, Omen spent what little time he had left preparing one final gift. He blessed Hueln's prized polearm, Talonclaw, imbuing it with his own power alongside the blessings already bestowed by the other wild gods. Wanting his fallen friend to be remembered, Hueln put the wild god's name on Talonclaw, ensuring that the Ancient's legacy would endure. Omen didn't immediately succumb to the fell corruption. Instead, he fell into a deep sleep where fell-tainted nightmares slowly consumed his mind until he was finally driven to madness. When he awoke, he was no longer the wise and noble creature he had once been. That version of Omen was gone. And now the new version of Omen rampaged across the land, attacking any who stood in his path. Because he had been blessed by Elune, Omen was both immortal and immensely powerful, making it nearly impossible to stop his destruction. His rampage did finally come to an end though, when a group of ancient heroes gathered in the village of Nighthaven to confront the maddened wild god. Calling down Elune's wrath, they stunned Omen long enough to drive him back into the waters of Lake Elunara, where he remains to this day. Whenever Omen rises from the depths, there's always hope that this time his mind will be free of the corruption, and that the wise ancient will return once more. However, until that day comes, adventurers are called upon to ensure his next awakening does not become another deadly rampage. Since the time of the Titans, Tortula the Wise has watched over Azeroth. The great turtle demigod serves as the patron of all creatures that move freely between the sea and the land. Having lived for countless ages, Tortula speaks an ancient language long forgotten by the mortal races. When adventurers first encountered him, they found themselves unable to understand his words, a reminder of just how old the wise wild god truly is. Like many of the other wild gods, Tortula answered the call to defend Azeroth during the War of the Ancients, joining the fight against the Burning Legion. Though enormous, Tortula appeared slow and sluggish, hardly looking like a threat compared to many of the other wild gods on the battlefield. That assumption quickly proved to be a mistake. Whenever the opportunity presented itself, Tortula crushed entire groups of demons beneath his immense weight while tearing through others with his powerful jaws. His stone-like hide and massive shell also proved nearly impervious to the Legion's attacks, allowing him to endure battle after battle. When the war finally came to an end, Tortula was one of the few wild gods still standing. After helping cover the retreat of the mortals who had fought beside him, he eventually came to rest beneath an enormous pile of slain demons. When they finally found him underneath that mountain of demon corpses, he shook off the demons and asked one question: did we win? After the War of the Ancients, Tortula escaped any serious injuries, but even the ancient wild god needed time to recover from the long conflict. He eventually settled within the healing silt of Mount Hyjal, where he entered a deep slumber that lasted until the cataclysm shattered Azeroth. Unfortunately, the Twilight's hammer captured Tortola before he could fully awaken, binding him in massive chains and leaving him helpless. While he remained imprisoned, the cult summoned the Dark Ancient known as Nemesis to take his place. Thankfully, adventurers arrived in time and freed both Tortola and his unborn children. Once released, the patient and wise Wild God quickly turned his attention toward those who had imprisoned him, fighting alongside the Guardians of Hyjal and Azeroth's champions. Tortola helped destroy the Twilight's Hammer's portal, bringing an end to their assault on Mount Hyjal. Following the Titan's cleansing of the darkness that had engulfed Azeroth at the hands of the old gods, peace and a semblance of normality slowly began to return to the world. Freya wandered the land, restoring life to places where it had struggled to survive and allowing lush forests and vibrant wildlife to flourish once more. As nature thrived, so too did its creatures. Much like Ursoc and Ursul before her, Freya eventually came upon a young panther cub. 2 wolves had just slain the cub's mother. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, the little panther wouldn't back down. She hissed, slashed, and fought with everything she had. If the wolves intended to kill her as well, they would leave with far more wounds than her mother had already given them. Thankfully though, the wolves decided the fight was no longer worth it and retreated. Freya then walked toward the wounded cub and gently lifted her into her arms, only to be met with a taste of her tiny fury from the fearless panther. Rather than becoming upset, Freya smiled. She was delighted by the cub's determination and unbreakable fighting spirit. After healing her wounds, Freya gave the young panther the name Ashamain, inspired by the striking black color of her fur. As the years passed, Ashamain grew into a massive panther, and no wolf would ever dare threaten her again. However, what pleased Freya most was that Ashamain never sought revenge. She often crossed paths with the very wolves that had killed her mother. But she understood they had acted not out of cruelty, but out of hunger. After all, was she not a predator herself? Though she accepted that truth, it didn't stop her from reminding the wolves exactly who they were dealing with. Every so often, Ashamain would creep toward their den and let out a thunderous roar from the entrance before bounding away, watching the terrified pack scatter in every direction. She had no desire to hunt them, but she certainly enjoyed making sure they never forgot her. Days turned into years, and Ashamain waited for age to take its toll, but it never did. Her strength continued to grow as generations of wildlife lived and died before her eyes. Eventually, the truth became impossible to ignore. Freya's gift had made her immortal. As the weight of that realization settled over her, immortality became increasingly difficult to embrace. There was little joy left in a life without challenge. The hunt no longer tested her, the struggle for survival had disappeared, and the untamed chaos of the jungle that had once defined her existence had become a distant memory. Instead, Ashamain wandered the wilds of Azeroth in solitude. She preferred to keep to herself, rarely allowing the world's inhabitants to catch even a glimpse of her, though every so often she would let a fortunate or unfortunate traveler see her passing through the forests. Eventually, stories of the Great Black Panther spread among the nearby troll tribes. Some sought to revere her as one of their Loa, while others saw only the glory that would come from slaying such a magnificent beast. To bring down Ashamain would be the greatest trophy a hunter could ever claim and a feat worthy of legend. But Ashamain was no ordinary prey. Despite her enormous size, she remained every bit as silent, cunning, and graceful as any panther. Time and time again, ambitious hunters entered her jungle believing they would be the ones to succeed. And time again, they had found themselves flat on their backs, staring into a pair of massive fangs, as Ashamain's piercing gaze robbed them of every ounce of courage they had brought into the hunt. She always let them leave. As the defeated hunters stumbled back toward their villages empty-handed, Ashamain's mighty roar echoed through the jungle behind them. The memory of her fangs and those unblinking eyes would haunt them for the rest of their lives. She could have killed every one of them if she had wished, but there was no need. By the time they returned home, they had already learned exactly where they stood in the jungle's hierarchy. While many of the wild gods chose to accompany Freya on her journeys across Azeroth, Ashamain was never one of them. She valued her independence too much to walk at the Keeper's side. Instead, whenever Freya entered her territory, Ashamain would quietly watch over her from afar. Freya always smiled whenever she got a glimpse of those familiar golden eyes watching from the shadows. Though Ashamain's spirit was too wild to be bound to another, An unspoken bond between the two would always remain. There was, however, one place Ashamain longed to see for herself, the Emerald Dream. Freya had used this pristine reflection of Azeroth to nurture life across the world, and it was to this realm that the Wild Gods had become bound. Drawn by its beauty, Ashamain eventually journeyed to Mount Hyjal, where the dream's presence upon Azeroth was at its strongest. Standing atop the great mountain for the first time, she found herself surrounded by a beauty unlike anything she had ever known. Captivated by what she found, Ashamain made her home upon the western slopes of the Well of Eternity. From there, she spent countless years drifting through the Emerald Dream, exploring its endless mysteries while remaining closely tied to the mountain she had come to love. The centuries passed quietly, civilizations rose and fell, yet little beyond the forest ever captured Ashamain's interest. For ages, she simply watched and wandered in peace. Then, everything changed. A new threat, unlike any the world had ever known, descended upon Azeroth. Answering Cenarius' call, Ashamain emerged from her long solitude and joined the other Wild Gods in defending their home. The time for quiet wandering had ended. The War of the Ancients had begun. Ashamain returned to the life she knew best, stalking her prey through the forests. Though centuries had passed since she had last known true battle, she had not lost a single step. The war had spread far beyond the Well of Eternity, but the forest remained her domain. And time again, she proved it. Demons vanished into the trees, only to find Ashamain's glowing eyes staring back at them moments before her claws and fangs tore them apart. One by one, the Legion's soldiers fell to the Great Panther. Ashamain became so feared that the Legion resorted to setting the forests ablaze, hoping to strip away the advantage she held within the trees. Instead, they only fueled her fury. Enraged by the destruction of the wilds she had sworn to protect, Ashamain fought with even greater ferocity alongside the other Wild Gods. This time, the Legion could no longer wonder what hunted them from the shadows. They witnessed her devastating power firsthand. Yet Ashamain was only one of many defenders. Together with the Night Elves, countless other creatures, and the Wild Gods, Azeroth's defenders tore massive holes through the Legion's ranks. But no matter how many demons they slew, the invasion showed no signs of ending. Then, Ashamain had a gut feeling something was wrong. Her instincts told her the Legion was after something far more important than simply conquering the battlefield. Reluctantly, she pulled herself away from the fighting around Zinashari. She then set out to discover what had drawn the demons' attention. She followed the raiding parties northwest, and they did not make the pursuit easy. Just as in her youth, every step forward had to be earned through battle. The Legion threw some of its strongest warriors in her path, and though the relentless fighting began to wear on her, Ashamain wouldn't relent. One after another, every demon that stood in her way fell. At last, she realized where they were headed: Suramar. The stand Ashamain made that day is why she is so deeply revered by the Druids of Al-Shara. Alone, she placed herself between the Legion and the city. She would stop them there or die trying. The forests of Suramar were not familiar to her, but it made no difference. The wilds, any wilds, were her home, and she would defend them all the same. She stalked silently through the trees, striking with ruthless precision before vanishing back into the forest. Demons fell by the dozens beneath her claws and fangs, but even a wild god could not fight forever. Fellfire scorched her body, poisoned blades found their mark, and exhaustion slowly began to overtake her. Still, she would not yield. She had to endure long enough for the Legion's commander to reveal himself. When the Pit Lord Ronikon finally emerged, he was determined to end Ashamain's relentless assault himself. If his soldiers could not bring her down, then he would. Knowing Ashamain's speed far surpassed his own, he relied upon his massive, jagged fell spear to keep her at a distance. Rather than ending the fight with a single massive blow, Ronikon sought to wear her down, inflicting wound after wound until she could fight no longer. Ashamain knew she could not allow the battle to drag on. The endless fighting, the poison coursing through her body, the burns from Fellfire, and the blood she had lost had pushed her to her limits. With every passing moment, her strength faded, and she knew it was now or never. Summoning every ounce of strength she had left, she hurled herself toward the Pit Lord. She cleared the shaft of his spear, but not its deadly tip. The jagged weapon drove straight through her chest, yet Ronikon had made one final mistake. He had underestimated Ashamain. Her claws sank deep into his shoulder as the watching demons looked on in horror. With the last of her strength, she dragged the Pit Lord closer, burying her fangs deep into his neck. He struggled desperately to throw her aside, but every attempt only drove her teeth deeper into his flesh. Ashamain would not let go. She had lived her entire life by one simple law of the jungle. The pack was not defeated until its leader's throat was between her jaws. Before she died, she would make certain that that law held true one final time. When the Pit Lord finally fell, the fell power coursing through his body erupted outward in a violent explosion, consuming nearly all that remained of Ashamain. Her sacrifice bought the people of Suramar the precious moments they needed to raise the city's magical barrier, preserving the city through the Sundering. Hidden from the world for thousands of years, Suramar would endure until the day its people finally emerged once again. Following Ashamain's sacrifice and the Pit Lord's devastating fell explosion, the land was left scarred. Thankfully, the Druids were eventually able to restore much of the forest's former beauty. Even so, lingering traces of Ranakon's corruption remained. Curiously, they never spread any farther, as though something within the land itself was holding the corruption at bay. Some Druids came to believe it was Ashamain's spirit continuing to protect the forest she had given her life to defend. In time, a shrine was erected at the site of Ashamain's final battle. Resting upon it were her fangs, the only part of the wild god to survive the explosion. They were placed there to honor her indomitable spirit, her courageous heart, and her untamed fury. To this day, Ashamain is remembered as one of Azeroth's fiercest defenders. Following her sacrifice, Ashamain's soul traveled to Ardenweald to begin the wild god's cycle of rebirth. There, she slumbered within her wild seed in Heartwood Grove, where she would remain until she was ready to return to the living world. However, when the anima drought struck the Shadowlands, Ardenweald was forced to make heartbreaking choices. With anima in short supply, many groves and their wild seeds faced being sacrificed so that others might survive. Fortunately, Ashamain's wild seed was spared, along with 2 other souls. It was chosen to be relocated to the grove Tir Naval, where it could continue receiving the anima needed for her eventual rebirth. Before the transfer could be completed, however, the wild seed was stolen by the jailer's ally, Muazala. Muazala sought to bend Ashamain to his service, hoping to gain another powerful soul for his cause. Ashamain refused without hesitation. Enraged by her defiance, Muazala cast her spirit into the Maw, condemning her to endless torment at the hands of the Mawsworn. Thankfully, though, her imprisonment would not last forever. A Mawwalker, champion of the Winter Queen, eventually rescued Ashamain from the Maw. Reunited with Vol'jin, she desired nothing more than to take revenge upon Muazala. But first, she needed time to recover from her ordeal. Ashamain remained in Ardenweald alongside Vol'jin and the fallen Loa, Hyreek and Shadra, where the Winter Queen would continue caring for their souls until the day they could be reborn once more. When Freya first created the Emerald Dream, the very first thing she brought into existence was the mother tree, Ga'Hanir. It was there that Aviana spent much of her time, soaring effortlessly through its endless branches. She quickly became enthralled with the great tree, for it was far more than a magnificent sight. Ga'Hanir was a wellspring of life, healing, and peace unlike anything else in the dream. As the years passed, Aviana imbued the mother tree with her own power, strengthening its connection to every winged creature upon Azeroth. In time, Ga'Hanir became a place of great reverence, where the spirits of birds and other winged beings longed to soar through its branches in the afterlife. When the call to join in the fight against the Legion came to her, she accepted it, and joined Cenarius and the other wild gods in the War of the Ancients. The Legion had never faced creatures like the wild gods before, towering over many of even their largest soldiers. Aviana was no exception. Vast wings carried her across the battlefield as she descended upon the Legion, cutting down demon after demon. Though she fought valiantly, Aviana was eventually brought down, crashing to the ground by the Legion's relentless flying beasts. When she landed on the ground, even if she could move, there was no time. Doomguards surrounded her and drove countless spears into her fallen body, bringing the great guardian of the skies to an end. Her death sent a shockwave through the Emerald Dream itself. Ga'Hanir, the mother tree she had cherished since the dawn of the dream, immediately shed all of its leaves. Throughout the dream, the loss of Aviana was felt as nature itself mourned the fallen wild god. Following the Sundering, the Night Elves struggled to rebuild their shattered world. Though Aviana had fallen in battle, her spirit, like those of other wild gods, continued to watch over Azeroth. Sometime later, the green dragonflight discovered an extraordinary gift, a branch from Gah'Hanir bearing a single acorn. Believing it had been entrusted to them by Aviana herself, they brought it to Alexstrasza and the red dragonflight. Together, they used the acorn to grow Nordrassil, the first world tree. Sensing that Aviana's spirit had guided this gift to them, Malfurion later concealed the branch within the Emerald Dream, as he feared that the harpies that went mad with Aviana's death might come for it. But in the dream, its presence became a source of healing, peace, and stability for the lands surrounding it. After the battle, Aviana's body was recovered by the Druids, who carried the fallen guardian to the highest peak of Mount Hyjal. There, within a sacred circle of stones just outside the shrine of Aviana, she was laid to rest overlooking the sky she had spent her life protecting. For 10,000 years, Aviana's spirit drifted through the Emerald Dream, waiting for the day she could be reborn. On Azeroth, however, her absence was deeply felt. Many of the harpies that had once served her descended into madness following her death. Others chose a different path. In honor of the fallen wild god, the druids of the Talon learned to take forms of ravens and crows, carrying on her legacy while they awaited her return. Years later, after Deathwing burst forth from Deepholm, the shattering would forever change the face of Azeroth. Seizing the opportunity, Ragnaros and his forces launched an assault upon Mount Hyjal, seeking to burn Nordrassil and claim the World Tree in the Fire Lord's name. One of their most important tasks was to aid in the resurrection of the fallen wild god Aviana. Along the way, they also drove back the maddened harpies that had overrun her shrine. Until her resurrection was complete, Aviana appeared only as a mysterious winged spirit as she guided those who sought to restore her. At last, the Guardian of the Skies was reborn in the flesh. Wasting no time, she joined the battle for Mount Hyjal, lending her strength to the defenders as they ultimately drove Ragnaros back into the Firelands. With Hyjal saved, Aviana returned to Gah'Hanir. Even after 10,000 years, her dream had never changed. She remained devoted to the Mother Tree and to the sanctuary it represented, setting out to restore it to the splendor it had known before her death. While the war on Draenor raged on, Aviana took a particular interest in the Arakoa. As creatures of the sky, she felt a responsibility to watch over them, as they too fell within her domain. Hoping they could one day experience the beauty of Gah'Hanir, she extended an invitation for them to visit the Mother Tree, but first she required the aid of adventurers. To fulfill her request, the adventurers ventured into Skyreach to recover a sacred feather. In return, Aviana bestowed upon them a magical feather that granted them wings for a short time, allowing them to soar through the skies. It was the same gift she had once given to the red dragon Crassus when he had become trapped in his elven form and was no longer able to fly. Now, she hoped to share that same freedom with the Arakoa as well. As time went on, not much happened within the Emerald Dream until the third invasion of the Burning Legion began. While the branch of Gah'Hanir had remained safe for thousands of years in its secret location, the Emerald Nightmare began spreading throughout the dream, corrupting everything in its path. Eventually, the corruption reached the sacred branch. At first, the taint was so subtle that even its guardians failed to recognize the danger. By the time the nightmare fully revealed itself, the branch had already begun pulsing with its corruption. Together, Aviana, the Guardians of the Dream, and adventurers held back the Legion's assault long enough for the Druids to cleanse the branch, preventing its corruption from spreading any further into the Emerald Dream. Not long afterward, the Legion launched an assault upon the shrine of Aviana. What first appeared to be a direct attack soon proved to be little more than a diversion. Thistly Crow discovered that the Legion's true target was Goldrin. Warned by Aviana, she and the Archdruid rushed to the Great Wolf's aid before the Legion could corrupt him. The Legion continued its assault by stealing Aviana's sacred idol, the artifact that granted Druids their flight form, intending to use it to corrupt the Harpies with fell magic. Once again, their plans were thwarted. The idol was recovered, cleansed of the Legion's corruption, and returned to the shrine of Aviana. In gratitude, Aviana bestowed upon the Archdruid the lunar wing form. During the Fourth War, Azerite elementals emerged beneath Nordrassil, threatening the sacred World Tree. Aviana joined the battle on the front lines, fighting to ensure that no harm would come to the tree that had grown from Gah'Hanir's sacred acorn. Later, when Amirdrassil began to bloom, Aviana once again answered the call to defend a World Tree. She joined the battle against the Druids of the Flame and the Primalists, helping ensure that Amirdrassil would survive to flourish. Following Farok's defeat, Aviana remained for the celebration of the new World Tree's blooming. sharing the moment with many heroes and defenders who had fought to protect it. When Cenarius was born, Elune knew that her son belonged to the mortal world. He was destined to walk among Azeroth's forests and its creatures, a child of both the heavens and the wilds. Though she could not raise him herself, she entrusted him to his father Malorn, knowing that she would always watch over him from above and light his path beneath the moon. The birth of the demigod sent ripples throughout the Emerald Dream, immediately drawing the attention of Ysera. Intrigued by the newborn, she welcomed him into her verdant realm and became his foster mother. Malorn, realizing that no one understood the dream better than the aspect of the green dragonflight, entrusted much of Cenarius' upbringing to her care. Ysera loved him as though he were her own, and over the ages that bond became so well known that many of Azeroth's elder races came to believe she was his true mother. Growing up, Cenarius came to love both worlds. The Emerald Dream became his sanctuary, a place where he wandered endless forests and learned the secrets of nature from Ysera herself. Yet he was just as captivated by Azeroth. He delighted in watching its creatures explore the world, witnessing life flourish across the lands that his parents had helped shape. As the years passed, Cenarius grew into a being of immense wisdom and power. As the son of Elune and Malorn, he inherited an extraordinary connection to the natural world. Forests answered his call, beasts sought his guidance, and even the trees themselves could be awakened to defend the wilds from those who threatened them. In time, Cenarius fathered many children of his own. His daughters became the graceful dryads, while his sons became the mighty keepers of the grove, among them Remulos, Ordanos, and Zatar. One Night Elf legend has persisted for thousands of years, claiming that the Centaur were the bastard children of Cenarius. In truth, that was never the case. They were actually the offspring of Cenarius' son, Zatar, and Princess Theradras, making the Centaur his grandchildren instead, according to Bran Bronzebeard. Even the Magnetar are believed to trace their lineage back to Cenarius as well. Cenarius himself has also spoken of sharing a kinship with the Night Elves, though he never revealed exactly what he meant. Whether it was a forgotten bond, an ancient truth, or simply a mystery lost to time, it remains one of many unanswered questions surrounding Cenarius and his family. During the height of the Mogu Empire, the Yongle lived upon the plains of ancient Kalimdor under the watchful eye of Cenarius. For many years they shared those lands with the Trolls, but growing tensions over hunting grounds eventually convinced the Yongle that it was time to journey south. Cenarius urged them to remain, but their minds had already been made up. Sadly, the journey led them not to a new home, but into slavery. Alongside many other races, the Yongle fell beneath the rule of the Mogu, yet they wouldn't remain in chains. United with their fellow captives, they rose against their oppressors, overthrew the Mogu, and won back their freedom. Afterward, many of the Yongle returned to the northern plains. Others, who would one day become known as the Taurens, sought out Cenarius once more. Returning to the great demigod, they learned the ways of druidism and the balance of the natural world. One such Tauren was Zarentor. Even now, high within the Storm Peaks, he recounts the tale of those ancient days. Long before the War of the Ancients, when Queen Azshara ruled over a thriving Kaldorei empire, the first Night Elves arose around the Well of Eternity. Their endless curiosity led them to seek out many of the ancient beings that wandered Kalimdor, but none would prove more influential than Cenarius. He welcomed them into Val'sharah, where he taught them the ways of nature and laid the foundations of what would one day become Night Elf druidism. Under Cenarius' guidance, the Night Elves developed a deep respect for the forests of Kalimdor and the countless creatures that called them home. They learned that nature was not something to conquer, but something to live alongside. Some became so devoted to the demigod's teachings that they chose never to leave his side. In time, those faithful few were transformed into the Woodland Guardians, forever changed as they dedicated themselves to protecting the wilds and staying by Cenarius' side. Yet as the centuries passed, another force began to capture the Night Elves' attention. The immense arcane power of the Well of Eternity offered possibilities that the quiet wisdom of the forest couldn't. Their civilization flourished beneath Queen Azshara, and with that prosperity came grand cities, towering structures, and ever-expanding roads. Forests that had once stood untouched were cleared to make way for the growing empire, while ancient trees were reshaped into homes and monuments. Beautiful though their civilization became, the Kaldorei were slowly losing touch with the natural world that Cenarius had taught them to cherish. As their fascination with the well grew, Fewer and fewer students returned to learn from the great demigod. Watching the people he had come to love drift farther from nature, Cenarius was overcome with sorrow. Believing his teachings had ultimately failed, he reluctantly withdrew into the wilds of Kalimdor, choosing to leave the Night Elves to follow the path they had chosen for themselves. As the centuries passed, Cenarius gradually faded into legend. Most of Azeroth's mortal races came to doubt that he had ever existed at all. Yet among those who had lost interest in the nature of the world, there was one young Night Elf named Malfurion Stormrage whose love for the wilds had never faded. While much of the Kaldorei society had become consumed by the power of the Well of Eternity and the growth of their magnificent cities, Malfurion found himself drawn instead to the forests and the ancient tales surrounding the mysterious demigod. Curious, Malfurion shared those legends with his twin brother Illidan and their close friend Tyrande Whisperwind. Though none of them truly expected to find the elusive guardian of the wilds, the promise of adventure was reason enough to search for him. As the three journeyed deeper into the forest of Kalimdor, whispers from the wild reached Cenarius. Intrigued, he chose to observe the young Night Elves from afar, searching their hearts before deciding whether to reveal himself. Of the three, it was Malfurion who captured his attention. There was a quiet respect for nature within him that reminded Cenarius of the students he had once taught long ago. For the first time in ages, hope began to stir within the great demigod. No longer content to watch from the shadows, Cenarius stepped from the forest and revealed himself to the surprised trio. He offered to teach them the ways of druidism, and all three eagerly accepted. Yet it became clear that each was destined for a different path. Malfurion possessed a natural gift for druidic magic, mastering its teachings with remarkable speed. While Illidan struggled to connect with the wilds, he eventually found his true calling in other sorcery, as the magic of the land didn't resonate with him as it did with his brother. Tyrande, though eager to learn, had already devoted herself to the Sisterhood of Elune, and would ultimately follow the path of a priestess. As Cenarius watched Malfurion grow, he realized that his faith in the Night Elves had not been misplaced after all. At long last, he had found the student who would become Azeroth's first mortal druid. Before the War of the Ancients erupted, Malfurion was plagued by a disturbing vision. He saw the Highborn abusing the immense power of the Well of Eternity, and deep within he knew Queen Azshara and her most powerful spellcasters were on the verge of unleashing a terrible catastrophe. He brought his fears to Cenarius, but by then it was already too late. The Burning Legion had arrived. Demons poured from the palace, slaughtering everything that stood in their path as Azeroth was plunged into war. Even as the world around them descended into chaos, Cenarius continued teaching Malfurion whenever time allowed. Yet he quickly realized that neither the Night Elves nor the forest could stand against the Legion alone. There was only one hope. Leaving the battlefield behind, he set out to rally the ancient wild gods of Azeroth. When all seemed lost, Cenarius returned, leading the greatest guardians of the natural world. Alongside Ursoc, Ursul, Goldrinn, Malorn, Aviana, Agamagan, and many others, he joined Jerrod Shadowsong and the Defenders of Azeroth. The arrival of the Wild Gods transformed what had seemed like certain defeat into renewed hope. Among those who would fight beside Cenarius was Hueln Highmountain of the High Mountain Tauren. During the fighting, Hueln rescued Ekaro, the moose favored by the demigod, along with members of the Blackmot tribe. In gratitude, Cenarius bestowed his blessings upon Hueln and his descendants. The High Mountain Tauren bore the great moose-like antlers that marked Cenarius' favor. Hueln would continue fighting beside the demigod throughout the war, protecting Malfurion during the summoning of the Dryads, and later standing with Jerrod Shadowsong in a battle against Tychondrius at Eldorath. Back on the front lines, for a time it seemed as though the Legion's advance had finally been halted. Yet the demons quickly adapted. Reinforcements poured through the portal, and the tide slowly began to turn once more. One by one, the Wild Gods were overwhelmed. Ursoc, Ursul, Aviana, Ashamain, and many others fell beneath the Legion's relentless assault. But even in the face of impossible odds, none of them retreated. Cenarius fought beside his allies with everything he had, refusing to yield an inch of ground. Eventually, however, he was overwhelmed. Surrounded by demons on the verge of death, Malorn crashed into the Legion's ranks, scattering demons in every direction with his mighty antlers and crushing countless more beneath his hooves. In only a few moments, he carved a path to his son and ensured Cenarius was safe. With nothing more than a glance toward Jerrod Shadowsong, Malorn silently made his intentions clear. Get him out of here. With Cenarius safely removed from the battlefield, Malorn turned back toward the Legion. Though the great stag fought with everything he had, even his immense strength could not stem the endless tide forever. When Archimonde himself entered the battle, Malorn made his final stand against the Defiler. The duel ended with the death of the White Stag, whose sacrifice bought Azeroth's defenders the precious moments they needed to escape. Witnessing Malorn's sacrifice, Malfurion unleashed his grief upon Archimonde. Calling upon the very roots of the earth, he bound the Demon Lord in a massive tangle of vines, crushing and restraining him with all the strength he could muster. Yet even that tremendous spell was not enough to finish the Defiler. Archimonde erupted in fellfire, burning away his restraints before retreating from the battlefield to recover from his wounds. Meanwhile, Cenarius was carried into the Emerald Dream to heal from the injuries he had suffered during the war. Though he should have remained there longer, he couldn't ignore the cries of Azeroth. As soon as he was able, he returned to the waking world following the Great Sundering, only to find that the single continent of Kalimdor had been shattered into the landmasses we know today. The devastation of the world was not the only shock awaiting him. Despite the destruction caused by the First Well of Eternity, Illidan's Stormrage had created a second one atop Mount Hyjal by pouring waters he had secretly preserved from the original well into a mountain lake. Illidan believed another well would one day be needed when the Burning Legion inevitably returned. But to the other Night Elves, his actions were reckless beyond measure. They feared the Legion could once again use the well as a gateway into Azeroth, just as they had before. To prevent that from ever happening, Alexstrasza planted the World Tree Nordrassil above the new Well of Eternity, allowing its roots to safeguard the waters below. Together with Ysera and Nosdormu, she blessed the great tree, transforming it into a sacred symbol of the Night Elves' renewed bond with nature. Under its blessing, the Kaldorei were granted freedom from disease, sickness, and the effects of aging. Cenarius gladly joined in the eternal duty of protecting both Nordrassil and the well hidden beneath it. Illidan, however, would not escape the consequences of his actions. With Gerard Shadowsong leaving the decision to Malfurion, the first druid concluded that his brother could no longer be allowed to pursue his dangerous ambitions unchecked. Standing beside his students, Cenarius helped imprison Illidan within a vast underground barrow, where he would remain bound in chains for thousands of years. Following the War of the Ancients, Tyrande Whisperwind became the High Priestess of Elune, while Malfurion emerged as the spiritual leader of the Night Elves. Together, they reshaped Kaldorei society. Tyrande founded the Sentinels, an elite force of warriors led by the Sisterhood of Elune, while Malfurion ensured that the teachings of Druidism would guide their people's future. Perhaps the greatest change of all was the outlawing of arcane magic. Having witnessed the devastation the Well of Eternity had brought upon the world, the Night Elves vowed never to repeat the mistakes that had invited the Burning Legion to Azeroth. Not all agreed with the decision. Led by Dothramar Sunstrider, many of the Highborn wouldn't abandon the arcane. Rather than risk another catastrophe, Malfurion and Tyrande chose to exile them from Kalimdor. As the Highborn departed, a great veil of mist settled over the continent, hiding the lands of the Night Elves from the sailors passing by their shores for thousands of years. Throughout this new age of isolation, Cenarius remained a constant guardian. From the sacred forest of Moonglade, he continued watching over the Kaldorei alongside his sons, the Keepers of the Grove, and his daughters, the Dryads. While the Dryads were once reluctant to reveal themselves, they became an increasingly familiar sight alongside the Keepers of the Grove, as they helped protect the forest that Cenarius had devoted his life to preserving. As the years passed, Druidism spread throughout Night Elf society. More and more Kaldorei came to walk the path that Malfurion had pioneered under Cenarius' guidance. In time, many druids entered the Emerald Dream for years at a time, leaving the defense of Kalimdor to Tyrande, the Sentinels, the Keepers, and the Dryads. Though Cenarius remained in Moonglade, he never truly stood apart from his people. Whenever the forest called for him, the great demigod was always ready to answer. The First and Second Wars came and went without disturbing the long vigil of Cenarius and the Night Elves, but the Third War would change everything. Driven west in search of a new home, the orcs eventually landed upon the shores of Kalimdor. Their arrival would set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately claim the life of the great demigod. Back in Kalimdor, Grommash Hellscream had already landed with his clan. He soon crossed paths with Jaina and her soldiers, sparking a clash between the two forces. When the rest of the horde finally arrived, led by Thrall, he ordered Grom to stand down and leave Jaina's encampment alone. But Grom could not hold to that command. His bloodlust took over. and he continued his assault on her forces. Thrall was eventually able to rein him in, but as punishment for defying his orders, he sent Grom into Ashenvale Forest to gather lumber for their base. While Grom departed into the woods, Thrall set out to search for the rest of the scattered horde. In his search, Thrall encountered creatures he had never seen before, beings who would soon be known to him as the Tauren. Back in Ashenvale, Grom and his clan were gathering lumber, unaware that the Night Elf Sentinels had already reported their actions to Tyrande. Though she was angered by what she heard, there was also a sense of relief. At least it was not demons invading her forest this time. For the time being, she ordered her sentinels to watch from a distance, hoping the orcs were simply passing through and would soon be gone. But it quickly became clear they were not merely passing through. They took what they needed from the forest without hesitation, cutting down its trees with little regard for what they destroyed. To Tyrande, these newcomers were barbaric and violent, and she would not allow them to remain any longer. On Tyrande's orders, the sentinels struck at the orcs. They were skilled fighters, but the orcs were not so easily brought down. Their strength and ferocity made every clash costly, and rather than being driven back, Grom seemed to thrive in the chaos. The battle only fueled him. As the fighting dragged on, the elves called upon their demigod Cenarius. He entered the fray himself, and the tide shifted almost immediately. The orcs fought with everything they had, but it quickly became clear they could not bring him down by conventional means. To Cenarius, they were no mere invaders. He could sense the taint within them, the lingering trace of demon blood running through their veins. He also believed their skin marked them as agents of the Legion. To him, those marked them as enemies of the wilds. He would not be satisfied with driving them from the forest. Nothing short of complete eradication would suffice. Against the combined strength of the elves and their demigod, the orcs began to falter. Retreat or death, those were the only paths left for them. And then, Grom felt it. Something deeper in the forest, something calling to him. Drawn by it, he led his warriors into the woods, searching until they found its source hidden within a dense corner of Ashenvale. A pool of thick green liquid lay before them. This was the blood of Manaroth, the pit lord that gave his blood for the orcs to drink all those years ago, causing the blood curse. Earlier, Tychondrius and the pit lord Manaroth had come to Ashenvale, and the mere presence of Manaroth had already begun stirring something within the Warsong clan. Their tempers sharpened, their instincts growing more violent by the hour, and Tychondrius and Manaroth had known this would happen. They had left the blood here intentionally, knowing it would draw the orcs in. Though years had passed since they last drank the demon blood, the curse had never truly left them. It lingered in their veins, waiting. The Legion saw the wild gods as a threat, especially Cenarius, and their plan had been to poison Ashenvale and weaken him, even bringing the Skull of Gul'dan to spread the corruption. But now, something far more direct presented itself. The orcs had a choice, though to Grom, it didn't feel like one. He stepped forward first and drank. The others followed soon after, and just like that, the chains were reforged. The orcs bound once more to the Legion, and to Manaroth. What followed was not a battle, it was a slaughter. Empowered by the demon blood, the orcs tore through the forest, cutting down anything that stood in their path, night elves and creatures of the wild alike. Cenarius fought with everything he had, calling upon the strength of the forest itself, but against the fury of the blood-cursed orcs, even that was not enough. Grom struck, his axe driving deep into the demigod's back, and with that, Cenarius fell. And with his fall, the forest itself seemed to recoil. The wilds around Hyjal trembled, as though they could feel what had been lost, and many fled in terror. Some would return to fight, but most remained hidden as the war pressed on. Following his death, Cenarius entered the cycle of rebirth that awaited the wild gods in Ardenweald. Yet while his soul recovered, a portion of his spirit lingered within the Emerald Dream, allowing him to witness the events unfolding on Azeroth from afar. From the dream, he watched as the Third War reached its climax upon the slopes of Mount Hyjal. There, the very orcs he had once viewed only as destroyers stood beside the humans and night elves in defense of Nordrassil. He saw Grommash Hellscream free his people from Manaroth's corruption, sacrificing his own life to end the blood curse that had enslaved the orcs for generations. In that moment, Cenarius realized he had misjudged them. Though fell corruption had once consumed them, they had chosen to stand against the Burning Legion rather than beside it. The respect he gained for the orcs during the Battle of Mount Hyjal would remain with him long after his spirit began to recover. In time, when Hyjal would once again face destruction, Cenarius would meet the orcs not as enemies, but as allies fighting to protect the world they now shared. During the war against Deathwing and his allies, Cenarius was once again called from the Emerald Dream to defend Mount Hyjal. Standing alongside the defenders of Azeroth, he fought against Ragnaros the Firelord and the forces of the Firelands, helping drive back and preserve both Nordrassil and the Sacred Mountain from destruction. Years later, when the Burning Legion launched its third invasion of Azeroth, a far more insidious threat emerged within Val-Shara. At the Grove of Cenarius, the great demigod lay in a deep slumber, one from which only the tears of a loon could awaken him. However, before that could happen, satyrs stole the sacred relic, buying the Emerald Nightmare enough time to corrupt Cenarius. Consumed by the Nightmare's influence, Cenarius believed he was defending the forest from invading enemies, just as he had countless times throughout his life. Even with the corruption, his instincts remained the same. He fought with everything he had, determined not to fail the wilds, or the memory of his father. Malfurion and the adventurers were left with no choice but to confront the demigod. After a fierce battle, they weakened Cenarius enough for Malfurion to begin cleansing the Nightmare's corruption from his Shando, which is known as Honored Teacher in Darnassian. The adventurers then pressed onward into the Rift of Alm, where they finally defeated Xavius and ended the Nightmare Lord's reign. With Xavius' fall, the corruption was lifted. Cenarius, together with the spirits of other cleansed wild gods, greeted the heroes within the dream, offering their gratitude for saving both him and the Emerald Dream itself. Beneath the boughs of Amirdrassil, Cenarius once again answered Azeroth's call. Fighting alongside the defenders of the New World Tree, he battled the Primalist and Ferox forces as they sought to destroy what the defenders had worked so hard to protect. When Alexstrasza was struck down during the fighting, Cenarius rushed to her aid, helping the Dragon Queen return to battle before continuing the assault alongside Azeroth's champions, calling upon the very force to rise against their enemies. With Ferox finally defeated, Amirdrassil blossomed into a new world tree. For Cenarius, it marked yet another chapter in the long history of the wilds he had spent his life protecting. As celebrations began beneath its branches, the ancient demigod stood among old friends, enjoying a rare moment of peace after countless ages of war. In Agamagan, I'm gonna fuck that name so many times. I was gonna say Agamagan. A formidable warrior, Agamagan. It's such a strange name. I can't wait to get to Ursel. At least I know how to pronounce that. His blood soaked into the earth and gave rise to immense masses of thorn-covered thorn-covered lines, which technically is correct. A glimmer of Asina appeared within the Emerald Dreamway to guide the Archdruid of the Dream. At first, the demons paid the great turtle little attention. Though enormous, like my tongue just got fatter. Thousands of years earlier, everything changed when the anima drought brought. I've watched Avatar too many times. I was like, everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. Joining the other wild gods and celebrating its long-awaited rebirth. That was so bad. That was so bad. Yet little beyond the forest ever captured Asamanes. Soldiers in I'm going to say soldiers and comrades alike. That's not right. Ronacon sought to When the Pit Lord finally fell, the fell power coursing through his vein. He has one vein, no more. Druids who sought to emulate his ferocity. From that day forward, the high mountain Tauren bore the great moose-like antlers. Antlers? The hell are antlers? With his trademark. The Tauren told us of Logosh. We adopted him. Why does that sound so weird? Adopted. We adopted him. We adopted him as... Why does it sound weird? Okay, we got this. Serious face. Serious face. We adopted him as one of our own. We adopted him as our warrior on this. Oh my god. We orcs ride. Oh, what the fuck is wrong with me? The first druid concluded that his brother could no longer be allowed to pursue his. Pursue? Pursue! Pursue! Inside joke. Okay. The first druid concluded that his brother could no longer be allowed to pursue. 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 Not pursue. 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 Following the War of the Ancients, Tyrande Whisperwind became the High Priestess of Elune, while Malfurion. This is what happens when you record very late. While Malfurion. Malfurion. Dear. Following the War of the Ancients, Tyrande Whisperwind became the. I was about to say became the Whisperwind. Oh, I can do this. I can do this. I have 2 pages left. We got this. But his allies fighting to protect. Before that could happen, however, satyrs stole the sacred the Wellick. Oh, we're at the very end. Please, brain, just work. I swear I'll get you a cookie or something. Just work for me.